She keeps every word he ever gave her. She simply cannot find the warmth they were wrapped in. And one man kneels in the ash of that warmth and builds it again. He never asks why he must. Let us begin at this moment. The first thing she noticed was the cold on her left side. Hermione Granger lay very still beneath the heavy green counterpane and let her eyes travel the ceiling. Old plaster, cracked in a hairline from the cornice to the light fixture. A fracture she knew the way she knew her own signature. Rain had come in the night. She could hear it letting go of the eaves in fat, unhurried drops. And beneath that, the deeper hush of a house settling on stone that had been laid before her grandmother's grandmother had drawn breath. The bed beside her was empty. The linen there held no warmth at all. Not the fading heat of a body recently gone, but the flat, neutral chill of cloth that had lain untouched all night. She turned her head. He was in the chair by the window. Draco sat with his back to her, already dressed, the grey of his shirt catching what little light the morning had managed. One hand rested on the arm of the chair. The other held a cup he was not drinking from. He had drawn the curtain aside just enough to watch the rain come down over the yew hedge, and he had not moved, she thought, in a long while. There was a stillness to him that had nothing to do with rest. It was the stillness of a man waiting outside a door for news he already knew. She sat up. The rings on her left hand slid loose against her knuckle, and she looked down at them. A thin band, a stone the colour of river ice. Her hand, and yet the weight of the metal registered as something borrowed. Everything was in its place inside her. That was the terrible part. She knew the date. She knew the house, Wren Hollow, 3 miles from the coast, bought in the 2nd year because neither of them could bear the other's history. She knew the chipped blue cup he was holding and that he had refused 4 times to let her mend it. She knew their wedding down to the hem of her sleeve, the smell of wet hawthorn, the tremor in his voice at the 3rd word of the vow. She knew he was her husband the way she knew her own birthday. She reached for the feeling underneath it. There was nothing there, not grief, not coldness, not even the small ache of an old affection gone quiet. Where the warmth should have been, there was a smooth blank, like a page from which the ink had been lifted so cleanly that the paper did not even bear the tooth of the pen. Her breath went out of her. Draco. He did not startle. He had been braced for the sound of her voice for hours, she realized, and the bracing had made him fluent. "Good morning." He set the cup down on the sill. He did not turn around at once. When he did, his face was arranged, entirely composed, and something in the arrangement of it made her chest hurt in a way she could not attach to anything. "There's tea. It'll want warming. What day is it?" "The 10th. A pause. "Of June." Their anniversary had been yesterday. She knew that too, in the flat way she knew the succession of the ministers for magic. "I don't feel it," she said. She had meant to build to it. She had meant to be careful, to give him some courtesy of approach. And instead, the words simply came out of her, bold as a stone dropped on a table. Something happened at the corner of his mouth. It was very small. It was over so quickly that she could not have sworn to it in front of the Wizengamot. "I know," he said. "You know." "Yes." "How can you possibly?" "Because you said the same thing last year." He picked up the cup again. not to drink, only to have somewhere to put his hand. And the year before, not always in those words. The year you turned 26, you told me you felt as though you'd walked into a play in the third act, and everyone knew their lines, but you. Her fingers found the edge of the counterpane and began, without instruction, to fold it into a neat crease. She noticed herself doing it and could not stop. "You should tell me what's happening to me," she said. "Now, directly. Do not manage me." "You wrote to yourself." He nodded towards the low table by the bed, where an envelope lay squared precisely to the wood grain. Her own hand on the front, the loop of the H unmistakable. "You always ask first, so you always leave that." She looked at the envelope and did not touch it. "I want you to say it." He was silent for a moment. Outside, the rain thickened, and the drops on the eaves ran together into a single seam of sound. "There's a curse on you," Draco said. "It was put there a long time before we married. It wakes on the hour of our vow, once a year, and it takes one thing. Not your memory of events, not your judgment, not your habits, not your name for the dog we don't have." The dry note in that was so worn with use that she understood it had once been a joke between them, and understood, too, that she had no idea what it referred to. "It takes what you feel for me. Only that. Only ever that. Everything else it leaves exactly as it found it." The room seemed to draw in slightly. And then the year begins again. "Meaning what, precisely?" He looked at her. There was a fatigue in it so old and so well carried that she thought it must have gone into his bones and set there like lead in glass. "Meaning, I start over," he said. Hermione Granger, who had built her entire life on the principle that any problem yielded to sufficient force of attention, sat in a bed she did not remember choosing, next to a man whose name she had taken, and felt the floor of her own reason tilt. 5 times, she said. 5. 5 years, and I have never once. You have. He said it evenly. Every year. By the spring you usually love me a great deal. His mouth did something that was almost a smile and did not go anywhere near his eyes. And then June comes. She got out of bed. She needed to be standing. The floorboards were cold under her bare feet, and the cold was clarifying, and she went to the window and stood at the opposite side of the curtain from him, and the rain ran down the glass in long, shivering lines that broke and remade themselves. "Why aren't you angry?" she said. "At you. At any of it. At me. At the curse. At the morning. You're sitting there like a man waiting for a train." She turned. "You have watched your wife look at you without recognition 5 times, and you are discussing the weather and the state of the tea. What would you like me to do?" "Something. Anything. Raise your voice." "And then what?" "I don't know. That's rather the point of it." He set the cup down again. This time he did it very carefully, and she saw the tendons stand out across the back of his hand, and the knuckles go the colour of bleached bone before he let go of the porcelain. "If I shout at you," Draco said quietly, "you will be a woman who has known me for 1 hour, being shouted at by a man twice your size, in a house you cannot leave without asking him where the gate key is. And that will be the first thing you learn about your husband this year. It will be the whole of your foundation." He drew a breath. "So no, I will not raise my voice. I would rather be a man waiting for a train." The silence that followed had a texture to it. She could hear the fire that someone had lit downstairs, the small collapse of a log. "You've thought about this a great deal," she said at last. "I have 365 days a year to think about it, and one to be right." "Draco, don't." It came out fast, the first unguarded thing he had said, and he stopped it immediately, the way a man puts his hand over a spilling glass. "Don't pity me. That is the one thing I can't hold up under. Be furious with me. Interrogate me. Take the house apart looking for the counter-curse. You always do. And there's a whole shelf of your notes in the library to save you the first 4 months. But do not stand there and be sorry for me, Granger, because I will not survive it." Granger. Not her name. Not the one she had signed on a register with hawthorn in her hair. She heard him hear it. He closed his eyes for the space of one breath. "Habit," he said. "Forgive me. The first week is always—" He stopped and did not finish, and she found she wanted, quite badly, to know what the first week always was. That was the thing that frightened her, not the curse, not the emptiness where the feeling should have been. It was that she was standing in a cold bedroom with a stranger in a grey shirt, and some part of her, some obstinate creature under the ribs that had not been told the rules, had already leaned an inch towards him. "I'm going to read the letter," she said. "Yes. And then I am going to ask you a great many questions, and you are going to answer all of them, including the ones you would rather not." "Yes." "Why do you agree so quickly? You must want something out of this." He was at the door by then, one hand on the frame, and he paused there with his back half turned, and the grey light caught the fine line of an old scar at his throat that she had never asked about, and evidently once had. "Wanting isn't the difficult part," Draco said. He went out. She heard his footsteps go down the stair, unhurried, and she heard them stop in the hall and stay stopped for a long moment before they went on. Hermione stood at the window until her feet had gone numb on the boards. Then she crossed the room and picked up the envelope and turned it over, and found on the back, in her own handwriting, pressed so hard that the nib had torn the paper on the downstroke, 4 words that were not an instruction and not an explanation, but something closer to a plea. Let him try again. The letter was 3 pages long, and she read it standing up, because sitting down would have felt like consenting to something. The handwriting was hers. That was the first violence of it. Not similar to hers, not a passable forgery, but hers exactly, down to the way the G dropped its tail below the line when she wrote quickly, and the small impatient dash she used instead of a comma when the sentence got ahead of her hand. A woman she had never met had sat at that desk by the window, with the sea wind coming through the sash, and had written to her the way one writes to a difficult younger sister. You will want to be angry with him. Be angry, if you like. He can carry it. But do not decide anything in the first fortnight, because you will not be deciding. You will only be flinching. He will not touch you. Not once, not by accident, not even to take a cup from your hand until you touch him first. That is not coldness. He learned it the hard way in the 2nd year, and I will not tell you how because it is his to tell. You will think he is performing patience at you. He is not. Watch his hands. The T is not a courtesy. It is the only language he has left. At the bottom of the 3rd page, beneath a line she had evidently written and then scratched out so thoroughly that the paper had furred, there was a postscript. I am not asking you to love him. I am asking you not to be cruel to him for loving you. There is a difference, and you will be tempted to pretend there isn't." Hermione folded the pages along their creases, which were already soft, as though the letter had been folded and unfolded a great many times before it was ever sealed. She set it on the table. Then she picked it up again and put it in the drawer, out of sight, because it had begun to feel like being watched. She went downstairs. The house resolved itself around her as she went, each room arriving in her mind a half-second before she entered it, the way a word arrives before you have quite decided to say it. Wren Hollow was long and low and old, all lime plaster and dark beam, with windows set deep into walls 2 feet thick. The stair turned twice. On the second turn there was a gouge in the newel post, where something heavy had struck it, and she knew, without being able to say how she knew, that it had happened during an argument about a chair. The kitchen smelled of wood smoke and orange peel. The fire had been banked and left burning low. The long table had been cleared, but for one place set at the end nearest the hearth, which was the warm end, and on it a plate turned upside down over another to keep the heat in. Beside it, a pot under a cloth. Beside that, a small dish of the sharp Seville marmalade she liked, and that no one else in any house she had ever lived in could stomach. Nobody was in the room. That was deliberate. She understood it at once, and the understanding irritated her more than his presence would have. He had made the breakfast, and then he had removed himself from it, so that she could eat without being watched eating, without having to perform gratitude, without the pressure of a face across the table. It was so precisely calibrated to what she would have wanted that it felt less like kindness than like a door held open by a man who had already read the room she was walking into. She ate standing at the counter out of spite, and the eggs were exactly right. She found him in the library. It ran the whole length of the north side of the house, low-ceilinged, cold-floored, and lined to the beams. He was at the far end on a set of library steps, doing something to the upper shelf with his sleeves turned back, and he did not look round when she came in, though she was certain he had heard the door. He gave her the room. He let her be the one to close the distance, or not. She stayed by the door and looked at the books. And then she stopped looking casually and began, without intending it, to look properly. The whole of the lower left range was hers. Not hers in the sense of belonging to the household, but hers in the sense of being arranged by a mind she recognized from the inside. Arithmancy by decade rather than by author, because the notation conventions shifted every 15 years, and grouping them chronologically made cross-referencing possible. Then a run of ward theory. Then a shelf of curse-breaking she did not recognize. 40 or 50 volumes, some of them in Aramaic, some of them clearly bought at great expense from collections that did not ordinarily sell. And on the shelf below, in 6 neat stacks tied with cord, notebooks, dozens of them. Her hand on the spines, dated by year. 4 years of work, she said. 5. He came down the steps, wiping dust from his fingers with a handkerchief. The first year you didn't take notes. You spent the first year furious, mostly, and then you spent it studying me instead of the curse, which I think was fair enough. And you kept all of it. I keep everything. He said it without weight. It's a family failing. We're hoarders of documents. It's how we survived the trials. She turned one of the cords over with a finger and did not untie it. There was a fear in her, quite specific, that if she began reading that woman's notes, she would begin thinking that woman's thoughts and would be led by degrees into that woman's conclusions, and would arrive at the end of the year having been conducted there by her own past self, like a horse walked into a stall. Draco, sit down. He looked at her for a moment. Then he took the chair by the cold hearth, and she took the one opposite, and there were perhaps 6 feet of flagstone between them. Ask, he said. How was it done? That isn't the first question you usually ask. I'm not interested in what I usually ask. How was it done? And by whom? And why did it choose our anniversary out of all the days in the year? He turned the handkerchief over in his hands. He folded it into quarters. He folded it again, and the linen would not take a 4th fold, and he stopped and set it on his knee and left it there. I'll tell you, he said, but not in this room, and not sitting down, and not today. That's an evasion. It's a condition. There's a difference, and you of all people ought to appreciate it. He met her eyes. I have told you this 5 times. It goes better when I tell it in the place it happened, because there is a version of it that sounds like an excuse, and the stones don't let me make that version. So you'll have it, but you'll have it properly, and you have been awake for 2 hours. Don't ration me. I'm not rationing you. I am refusing to hand you the worst thing in your life before you've finished your tea. Something flickered under the composure and was gone. You may call that management if you like. You usually do. Around the 3rd week, you usually call it something a good deal less polite. What do I call it? You call it a cage with the door left open. She sat back. The fire had gone to embers, and the room held that particular cold that stone rooms hold in summer, a cellar cold, unrelated to the season outside. Rain moved across the windows in gusts. Somewhere in the roof, a beam contracted and made a small report like a knuckle cracking. I want to ask you something, and I want a straight answer, she said. Then ask it straight. Why do you stay? He did not answer at once. He looked at the dead fire. Because I'm married to you, he said. That isn't an answer. That's a legal status. For some of us, it's the same thing. No. She leaned forward. No, you don't get to hide behind the vow. I've read the vow. I remember making it. I remember every syllable, and I do not remember a clause about a woman who forgets you annually. Any court in the country would dissolve it in an afternoon. Any healer would tell you it was reasonable. Your mother, I imagine? She stopped. My mother has never once suggested it, Draco said, which is not nothing, considering. Then why? Why does anyone stay anywhere? Because they want to, because they're afraid to leave, because they think they deserve it. Her voice had climbed and she pulled it back down. Which is it? The tendons rose across the back of his hand where it rested on the chair arm. Not a fist, just the flat, gripping pressure of a man holding onto furniture. You've been awake 2 hours, he said, and you're already trying to diagnose me. You're the only material I have. That's the first true thing either of us has said today. He almost laughed. It came out of him rough, as though the mechanism were rusted. All right, here is what I will give you. I stay because on the 4th of April this year, You fell asleep in this chair with your hand in mine, and you did it without thinking about it, the way you'd put your hand on a banister. And I sat here for 2 hours and did not move because I didn't want to wake you." He looked up. "That's the whole of it. That's the entire ledger. 11 months of small, unthinking things, and then one morning in June, and then I begin again. And if you're asking me whether the arithmetic is favorable, then no, obviously not. It is a catastrophe of arithmetic. But I'm not doing arithmetic." She found that she had no answer ready. That frightened her more than the curse had. She always had an answer ready. "You said I study you," she said after a while. "In the first year, yes. What did I conclude?" "You told me I was the most exhausting man you had ever met, because you could not work out whether I was good or merely careful, and that you intended to find out." He picked up the handkerchief again. "I told you they might be the same thing at a sufficient distance. You said that was the most Slytherin sentence ever constructed, and that you'd write it on my headstone." Hermione laughed. It surprised her so completely that she put her hand over her mouth and looked up and found him utterly still, watching her with an expression she could not read at all, something raw and quickly covered, a man seeing weather he had waited months for and not daring to name it aloud. "Don't," she said. "Don't look at me like that." "Like what?" "Like that's proof of something." "It isn't proof of anything." He stood and gathered the empty cup from the mantel, and his voice came back to its flat, careful register with the ease of long practice. "You laughed in the second week last year too. And in the first week the year before. It doesn't mean anything, and I have taught myself not to count it, and I would be obliged if you didn't tell me what my own face is doing." He went out. She stayed where she was, in the cold room, listening to him move through the house. The flagstones, the boot scraper, the door to the yard, and then nothing but the rain. And when she went to the window some minutes later, she saw him standing out in it, bareheaded, 20 yards from the house, not walking anywhere, simply standing in the downpour with his back to her and his shoulders perfectly straight, letting it come down on him until the grey shirt went black at the shoulders and clung. She watched him for a long moment. Then she reached up, quite deliberately, and drew the curtain closed, because looking felt like a form of taking something he had not offered. It took her 9 days to make him keep his promise. They were not empty days. She had expected the house to be unbearable, and found instead that it was merely strange, in the way a coat is strange when it fits perfectly and you cannot remember buying it. She learned the sound of his step on the flags, and could tell from it whether he intended to come into a room or pass by it. She learned that he rose at 5:30 and worked until 8 in a small office off the back stair, and that the work was legal, tedious, and lucrative. Reparations trusts, estate settlements, the slow unpicking of 20 families' worth of ruined paper, and that he did it because it was the only thing his name had ever been good for that did not make him ill to think about. She learned that he did not eat with her unless she asked. That was the thing that got under her skin. Not the courtesy of it, which she could have borne, but the precision. He had drawn a line around himself in chalk and stood behind it with such discipline that she began to feel she was the one who had drawn it, and that she was being made to look at her own handwriting. On the fourth evening, she set 2 places at the long table without saying anything, and when he came in from the yard with rain in his hair, he stopped in the doorway and looked at the second place for slightly too long. "You'll want to eat," she said, not looking up. "You've been out since 4. I can eat later. You can eat now, at this table, in this chair, and stop making me feel like a warder." He sat. He ate. He asked her at some point about a passage in the ward theory she had been reading, and she answered. And then she realized she had been answering for 11 minutes, and that he had not once interrupted or corrected her or looked at anything else. And the realization made her lose her thread entirely. "You're doing it again," she said. "Doing what?" "Attending to me. It's relentless. It's like being read. Would you prefer I ignored you?" "I'd prefer you did something imperfectly, just once, so I had something to hold on to." He set down his fork. "I burnt the bread on Tuesday. You burnt it deliberately. I watched you do it." There was a silence of about 2 seconds, and then Draco laughed, properly, briefly, caught off guard, and the sound was so unpracticed that it seemed to startle him more than her. "That is entirely slanderous," he said, "and I will not be dignifying it. You watched the pan. You watched it go too far. You didn't move. I was thinking about a codicil. You were thinking about giving me something to be scornful about. Granger!" He caught it a half-beat too late this time and did not correct it, and neither did she, and the name sat on the table between them like a third-place setting. "If you're going to prosecute me, at least let me finish the potatoes." On the 9th morning she came down at 6, dressed, with her cloak already over her arm, and stood in the doorway of the little office until he looked up from the papers. "Today," she said. He put down his pen. "You said the place it happened. I've waited 9 days. I have read 4 of my own notebooks, and I have learned a great deal about the structure of the thing, and nothing at all about where it came from, because the woman who wrote them already knew and didn't see the point of writing it down." She fastened the cloak at her throat, and her fingers were steady, which pleased her. "So, today." Something passed over his face and settled. "Yes," he said. "All right." They travelled by Flue to the village and walked the last mile, because he said without further explanation that arriving in the Great was worse. The lane ran between hedges dripping with the night's rain, and the light was thin and grey gold, and the hawthorn had gone over and gone brown at the edges. Neither of them spoke. His hands stayed at his sides. Twice the lane narrowed, and their shoulders came near enough that she felt the warmth of him through 2 layers of wool, and both times he adjusted his stride without appearing to, and gave her the width of the road. The gates came out of the hedge without warning. Malfoy Manor stood at the end of a straight gravel drive with its windows blank in the morning. It was smaller than she had expected. That was the first thing. It had lived in her mind at a scale that the actual building could not sustain, and seeing it reduced to brick and lead and a badly kept lawn made something turn over in her stomach that was not fear, but the humiliating discovery that it might have been. "My mother's at Cannes until September," Draco said. "There's no one here but the house." "Good. Is it?" "I don't want to be looked at." He nodded once and did not offer her his arm. Inside, The hall smelled of cold ash and beeswax, and, faintly, of lilies, the way rooms do that are kept up by staff for a family that has mostly stopped living in them. Their footsteps went ahead of them and came back off the far wall, hollow, doubled. And Hermione found that she was walking with her weight forward on the balls of her feet, like someone expecting the floor to move. He stopped at a set of double doors and put his hand flat on the wood. "You can wait," he said. "You have waited once, the 3rd year. You got to this door and you said you'd changed your mind, and we went home and I told you in the kitchen instead. Was it better?" "It was easier. It wasn't better." He was not looking at her. "You asked me the same question every week for 2 months afterwards, in slightly different words, because some part of you knew you hadn't got the whole of it. Then open the door." He opened the door. The drawing room was long and pale and almost entirely empty. No furniture, but a single covered chaise at the far end under a dust sheet. No rug. The floor was a wide golden parquet, polished, and where the light fell across it from the tall windows, she could see the grain of the wood running away in long lines towards the fireplace. She stood on the threshold and waited for the room to do something to her. It did nothing. There was no ringing in her ears, no cold hand at the neck, no rush of anything at all. It was a handsome, empty room in a house she did not like, and the absence of feeling was so total that she wanted to laugh, and then wanted, quite suddenly and violently, to sit down on the floor. "There," Draco said. He had not moved from the doorway. He was pointing with 2 fingers, not raising his arm, at a place about 9 feet in, where the parquet caught the light differently. "That's a repair," she said. "Yes. The wood's been replaced. 4 boards. My mother had it done in the September after. She didn't tell me she was doing it. I came home and there were carpenters, and she was standing exactly where you are, watching them, and she said nothing about it then or ever." Hermione looked at the 4 boards. "Tell me," she said. He told her. He did not soften it, and he did not perform it. He stood in the doorway with his hands at his sides and gave it to her in a flat, unhurried voice, the voice of a man reading out a document he had read out before. And the flatness was the only mercy in it. Snatches on the road. The 3 of them brought up the drive, his aunt in the hall, the sword and the question of the vault, and the decision that the boys should go down to the cellar and the girl should stay. "She used a knife," he said. "I know. I have the arm. You have the arm. You do not have the knife." His jaw moved. "That's the part nobody tells you, because nobody knew it but the family. It was not an ordinary blade. It came out of the Black Collection. It had been in her keeping since she was 19, and she had been feeding it for the better part of 20 years. Runes on the tang under the grip. You can't see them. I have seen the drawings. Feeding it how? Blood and intention, mostly, and a great deal of time. It was made for a specific purpose." He paused. "It was made to punish dilution. That's the family word for it. The Blacks were terrified of the line thinning, marrying out, marrying down, marrying Muggle-born. And they built things to make it costly. That knife was one of them. It was designed to lie dormant in the flesh of a woman like you, and wake if she ever bound herself to a man of that blood." The room was very quiet. "Bound herself," Hermione said. "Married. Say it plainly. It sleeps until there's a vow to feed on. Our vow. He did not blink. It takes what a marriage is made of, not the facts of it, the warmth. It drinks the year's worth and leaves the ledger intact, because a curse built by that family was never going to be satisfied with making you forget me. It wanted you to keep every reason and lose the feeling. It wanted you to look at your own life and see an arrangement. She put her hand flat against the doorframe. So, it isn't random, she said. No, it isn't a misfortune. It's a design. And the mechanism that triggered it was... She stopped. Her mind had gone ahead of her mouth and she had to catch it up. The wedding triggered it. Yes, the wedding I asked for. Hermione? No, don't. Don't do the voice. She pushed off from the frame. You knew about the knife. The silence that came then had a different quality altogether. She heard the house in it, a clock somewhere 2 rooms away, going on with its business. I knew there was a knife, Draco said. You knew what it was for. I knew what the blacks made things for. I did not know that specific blade had been used on you until 18 months after the war, when I went through the inventory of her effects with a curse breaker, because I could not sleep and I had begun to suspect. Suspect what? That the scar wasn't healing. His voice did not rise, but something in it had gone very taut. You had every other mark from that year gone by the autumn. That one didn't fade and didn't take dittany, and no one at St. Mungo's could tell you why. And you had stopped asking because you decided it was a keepsake and you'd rather have it than not. And I looked at your arm across a table in a ministry archive at 1 in the morning, and I thought, that is not a scar. That is a signature. And you said nothing. I had it examined, twice, by people who charge more than my house is worth and sign things under oath. He took 1 step into the rooms and stopped, as though the boards themselves had objected. Both of them told me the same thing, that there was a working in it, that it was dormant, that there was no evidence it had any trigger at all, and a great deal of evidence that the woman who made it had died before completing it, which is what happens to 9/10 of the objects that family produced. They told me the risk was theoretical. Theoretical. That was the word. And you married me anyway. He did not answer. You had the parchment in your hand, she said, and her voice had gone somewhere strange and quiet. You had 2 experts telling you there was a working in my arm of unknown function, and I asked you in October to marry me in June, and you said yes, and you never told me. Yes. Why? Because you would have called it off. He said it simply, and the simplicity was worse than any defense he might have mounted. Not out of fear, out of arithmetic. You would have sat down with the parchment and worked out the probabilities and decided the responsible thing was to wait 5 years for better information, and you would have been entirely right. And I... He stopped. Finish it. I did not want to wait 5 years. His hand had closed on nothing at his side, and the knuckles had gone white, and he did not seem to know it. There. That's the whole of it. That's the sum of my defense. There was a chance in 100, and I took it on your behalf without asking you, because I had wanted you since I was 19 years old, and I had been quiet about it for 3 of them, and you had just asked me, and I was not going to be the man who said not yet. The light had shifted while they stood there. It fell now across the 4 replaced boards, and the new wood was a shade lighter than the old, and once she had seen it, she could not stop seeing it. Hermione looked at the floor for a long moment. Then she walked forward 9 feet and stood on the repair with both feet and turned around to face him so that he had to look at her standing in the exact place where it had been done. "Say the rest of it," she said. He did not come into the room. That was what she noticed first, standing on the pale boards with the light across her shoes. He stayed in the doorway with one hand on the frame, and the hand was doing the work his face refused to do. The fingers pressed white against the painted wood. "There's no rest of it," he said. "There is. You've told me what you knew, and when you knew it. You haven't told me where you were standing." "Hermione!" "You said the stones don't let you make the version that sounds like an excuse, so make the version that doesn't." She did not raise her voice. She found she did not need to. "Where were you standing?" For a moment she thought he would refuse and turn and walk out into the hall, and that would be the end of it and the beginning of something much worse. Then he lifted his chin very slightly and pointed with 2 fingers at the wall behind her, to the left of the fireplace, between 2 windows. "There," Draco said, "against that panelling, about 4 feet from where you're standing." She turned her head. It was an ordinary stretch of wall. Cream paint, a beaded moulding, a faint discoloration where a picture had hung and been taken down. "For how long?" "All of it." "And you did nothing?" "I did nothing." She waited. He did not qualify it. He did not tell her he had been 17, or that his mother's hand had been on his sleeve, or that his father was in the room, or any of the 12 entirely true things that a lesser man would have laid down like coins on a counter. He simply let the sentence stand there in the empty room and be as ugly as it was. And that, more than anything he had said in 9 days, went into her like a splinter of ice, because she recognized it. It was the shape of a man who had rehearsed a defense 1,000 times in private and had made a decision, at some point in the last 5 years, never to speak it aloud. "You've never once tried to explain it," she said slowly. "No. Not in 5 years. Not in any of them." "No? Why?" "Because an explanation is a request." He was still holding the doorframe. "It asks you to weigh things and come back with a lighter sentence. And I would rather you thought me a coward on accurate information than a decent man on partial." The clock 2 rooms away went on ticking. Something in Hermione's chest turned over painfully and settled in a new position, and she understood with absolute clarity that she was no longer standing where she had been standing when she came into this house. Not because he had earned anything. He had not. But because she had walked in believing herself the prisoner of a man's obligation, and she was walking out understanding that she was the creditor of a debt he had never once tried to negotiate down. "I want to go home," she said. "Yes. Not because I'm frightened, because this room is a stage and I refuse to have this conversation on it." "Yes," he said again, and stepped back from the doorway to let her pass, and she came out of the drawing room and did not look at the panelling between the windows, and he closed the doors behind them and did not lock them, which she noticed and thought about all the way down the drive. They walked the mile back in silence. It was different silence. She could feel the difference in her own shoulders. On the way out, she had walked half a pace behind him and slightly to the side, the way one walks behind a guide one does not trust. On the way back, she walked level with him, and when the lane narrowed, she did not adjust, and their sleeves brushed twice, wool against wool, and she felt him go rigid for a fraction of a second each time and force himself not to move away. At the stile, he stopped. "May I say one thing?" he said, "and then not say it again for the rest of the year?" "Go on." "You will spend the next month trying to work out whether you are angry with me for marrying you or angry with me for standing at that wall, and you will find that you can't separate them, and you will conclude that they are the same thing." He was looking out over the field, not at her. "They aren't. One of them I did to you, and one of them I failed to do for you, and they cost different amounts, and if you charge me the same for both, you'll never get the account straight." That is an extremely lawyerly thing to say. "It's the only trade I have." "And which do you think is the greater?" He climbed the stile first and turned and stood below it and made no move to offer her his hand, and waited while she came over on her own. "Standing at the wall," Draco said. "Obviously, marrying you was selfish. Standing at the wall was the other thing." He set off up the lane. "But you never charged me for it. Not once in 5 years. Every year you find a way to forgive me for the room before you finished being angry about the wedding. And every year I let you, and every year I know precisely what I'm doing when I let you." "And what's that?" "Accepting a payment I haven't earned, because the alternative is watching you leave." The rain began again as they came down the hill towards Wren Hollow, fine and cold and blowing sideways off the sea, and the hedges hissed with it, and by the time they reached the door, her hair had gone to ruin, and his shoulders were dark. He held the door. She went in first, and in the low doorway her hand, reaching for the frame at the same moment his did, came down on the back of his. It was nothing. 2 seconds of contact, cold skin on cold skin, rain wet, the ridge of a knuckle under her palm, the hard press of the ring he wore on the 3rd finger, a plain band, warmed by nothing, biting slightly into her hand where the metal caught. He did not move. That was what undid her, not the touch. A less careful man would have turned his hand over or drawn away or made some small joke to release the pressure of it. He did neither. He simply stood absolutely still under her hand with the rain coming off his hair, and let her decide how long it lasted, and she understood that he would have stood there until the tide came in if she had not taken her hand back. She took her hand back. "I'm going to change," she said, and her voice came out wrong, and she went up the stairs faster than the situation required. She sat on the edge of the bed in a wet cloak for 11 minutes without moving. The house was quiet beneath her. Somewhere below she heard the scrape of the kettle onto the range, then the small domestic percussion of a cupboard, a spoon, a lid, and she sat and listened to a man make tea. He would leave outside a door and not knock about, and she pressed the heel of her hand against her sternum, where something had begun to ache and would not be reasoned with. That night she did not sleep, and at 1:30 she went down to the library. She lit no candles. There was a moon behind the cloud, and enough of it came through the long windows to walk by. She went to the shelf of tied notebooks and stood in front of them, and did not untie any of them. And then she went along the range and found, at the end, wedged flat between 2 atlases, as though it had been put there in a hurry and never retrieved, a slim volume with no title on the spine. She took it to the window. It was a household book, accounts in his hand, meticulous, ruled in 2 columns. And beginning about a third of the way in, between the entries for coal and for the glazier, other things had begun to appear. 2nd Tuesday. She noticed the marmalade, said nothing. Ate 2 spoonfuls. March. Asked me about the Grimwald judgment without being asked to. 20 minutes. She sat on the window seat with the book open on her knees and read 4 years of a man keeping score of a thing he had told her he had taught himself not to count. 4th of April. Fell asleep in the chair. Hand in mine. Did not wake. 12th of May. Called me Draco in front of Theo without thinking about it first. 19th of May. Laughed at breakfast. 2nd of June. 8 days. 4th of June. 6 days. 9th of June. 1 day. She wants to plant the espaliers along the south wall in the autumn. I said yes. I will plant them anyway. The rain had stopped. The house ticked and cooled. Hermione sat with the book open and her hand flat on the page and found that her eyes had filled and spilled without any preliminary at all, silently, the way a glass overfills when you have stopped watching it. That isn't for you. He was in the doorway in shirt sleeves, holding a candle in a dish, and the flame put a moving light up the shelves behind him. She did not close the book. You told me you didn't count, she said. I told you I'd taught myself not to. It didn't take. He came 2 steps into the room and stopped, as he always stopped, at some invisible line. Put it back, please. No. Hermione. You have been managing me for 9 days. You have handed me exactly as much of yourself as you judged I could carry, in the order you judged best, at the pace you set, and you have been so unfailingly correct about it that I have not once been able to catch you being a person. She held the book up. And then I find this. 3 years of a man counting the days until his wife stops loving him. 6 days. 1 day. You wrote down 1 day, and then you went out and ordered fruit trees. The candle flame bent and steadied. They're good trees, he said. Don't. They're doyenne du comis. They take 4 years to fruit. Draco. Don't. 4 years, Hermione. His voice cracked straight down the middle. Once, and he stopped and put the candle dish down on the shelf because his hand was no longer steady enough to hold it level. I ordered them in June, knowing you'd wake up in the morning and not know why I'd bothered. I have planted an orchard for a woman who will meet me new every summer for the rest of my life, and I will go on planting it, and I do not want to be admired for it, and I certainly do not want to be pitied for it, and I want you to put that book back on the shelf and forget you saw it, because it is the single most humiliating object in this house. She stood up. She crossed the floor, 6 feet of it in the dark, over the cold flags in bare feet, and she watched him hold his ground with an effort that showed at the jaw and in the tendon of his neck. And she stopped a foot in front of him, close enough to feel the heat coming off him and the faint, sharp trace of ozone that clung to him from whatever he had been doing at the back of the house at 2 in the morning. He did not raise a hand, not to touch her, not to ward her off. It isn't humiliating, she said. You don't get a vote. I do, actually. It's my name in it. She was crying and did not care and did not wipe her face. You have made yourself so small that there's nowhere in this house for me to find you. And then you leave a ledger between two atlases where a woman who reorganizes shelves when she can't sleep will find it inside a fortnight. You are not as opaque as you think you are. That's the first true thing you've said tonight. Then say one back. The candle guttered. His breath went out of him. Every year, Draco said, you find something. Not always this. Once it was a letter. Once it was a bloody receipt for the trees. Once you found me asleep at the desk with your third notebook open at the page where you'd written that you thought you could love me. And every year you look at me exactly the way you are looking at me now. And I have to stand here and remind myself that what you are feeling is sympathy, and that it will be gone by August, and that if I reach for you now, I will spend the rest of the year knowing I took something from a woman who was only sorry for me. And if I reached for you, his eyes closed. Don't ask me that at 2 a.m, he said. In the dark, holding that book, she put the book back on the shelf. Not because he had asked, because standing there with it in her hands had begun to feel like holding a man's ribcage open, and because she wanted, quite badly, to give him one thing that year that he had not had to negotiate for. She slid it between the atlases exactly as she had found it, spined flush, and stepped back. Good night, Draco. Good night. She went up. He stayed. In the morning, the candle dish was clean on the shelf, and the book was gone from between the atlases. And she did not look for where he had moved it, which she counted privately as a kind of restraint she had not known she possessed. July came in hot and salt-heavy off the water. The work took her, as work always took her. She untied the cords on all 6 stacks and read her own notebooks in order. And it was a peculiar species of vertigo. Watching a mind she recognized close in on a problem across 4 years, making the same wrong turnings she could feel herself preparing to make. The first year's notes were furious and scattered. The second year's were better. By the third, the handwriting had steadied into something methodical and cold. And by the fourth, the woman writing them had begun to leave small notes in the margins for whoever would come after. Don't waste August on continental sources. Nothing there. He will pretend the Kirkwall visit didn't cost him anything. It cost him 900 galleons and a favour to Nott's father. Make him say so. If you are reading this in a bad mood, you will decide I was sentimental. I wasn't. I was correct. They went to Kirkwall again in the second week of July. The curse-breaker was a woman of about 70, named Ines Bramhall, who worked out of a stone house above the harbour and kept 41 clocks. None of them agreed. She held Hermione's forearm in both hands under a lamp for the better part of an hour without speaking, turning it, tilting it, humming once, and then let go and sat back and rubbed her eyes. It's a good piece of work, she said. I want to be clear that I'm not admiring it, but it's good. Can it be lifted? Not by force. It's not sitting on you, it's sitting in something. That's the difficulty. Bramhall poured tea nobody drank. Most curses are a thing done to a person. This one is a thing done to an arrangement. It's got a handhold somewhere and it's drawing off that. And until you know what the handhold is, you may as well cut at water. And if we found it, then you'd have a decision, not a solution. In my experience, those are worse. The old woman's eyes went, briefly and shrewdly, to Draco standing by the window with his hat in his hands. Your husband's been asking me the same question in different clothes for 4 years. What question? Whether there's a way to move it onto him. The room's 41 clocks went on disagreeing. Hermione turned her head. Draco was looking out at the harbour with an expression of complete neutrality, the expression of a man who has heard something said aloud and has decided to be interested in boats. "Is there?" Hermione said. "No," said Bramhall. "And I've told him so 4 times, and he'll ask again next year, and I'll tell him again. It's not a transferable working. It's not even really about him. He's the door, not the room." She snorted. "He doesn't like that. He'd much rather be the room." They did not speak of it on the road, or on the boat, or at the inn at Stromness, where they took 2 rooms, because he had booked 2 rooms without discussing it, as he had every year. But that night, she stood in the passage outside his door for a full minute, with her hand raised, and did not knock, and went back to her own bed and lay looking at the ceiling with her jaw aching. August was the bad month. It was bad because it was good, which was the cruelty of the arrangement, and the thing her own notes had warned her about in 3 separate places. The weather held. They fell into a rhythm without ever agreeing to one. He worked until 8, she worked until noon. They ate at the long table, they walked the cliff path in the evening, when the light went long and gold, and the sea went the colour of hammered pewter. He stopped waiting to be asked to sit down. She stopped noticing that he had. She learned the small things that no letter could have given her, that he hummed, badly and unconsciously, when he was doing anything with his hands, that he was frightened of gulls and would not admit it, that he read novels, actual novels, terrible ones, and hid them under legal pads with the shame of a man caught at something obscene, that when he laughed properly, he put his head back, and it made him look 19. And she began, one evening on the cliff path, to want to put her hand in his. The wanting arrived without ceremony. They were walking, and the wind was pushing the marram grass flat in long silver waves, and he was mid-sentence about something ludicrous, a client who had left his entire estate to a hippogriff, and her hand simply announced that it would like to be in his hand, and she stopped walking. He stopped too, 2 paces on, and turned. "What?" "Nothing." "You've gone white." I said nothing. She started walking again, too fast, and he lengthened his stride and said nothing more about it. And that night she sat at the desk in the bedroom with a fresh page in front of her and wrote at the top, in a hand that was not entirely steady, a single question. "Is this mine?" Because that was the thing. That was the trap in the machinery, and she had walked into it with her eyes open and her own notes in her hand. She had read the ledger. She had stood in the drawing room at the manor and heard a man refuse to defend himself. She had watched him plant fruit trees for a woman who would not know why. She was being courted expertly by someone who had 4 years of data on precisely which small mercies undid her, and who deployed them not out of calculation, but out of something worse, out of knowing her completely. And how, exactly, was a woman supposed to distinguish between falling in love and being reconstructed? Every year by the spring, you usually love me a great deal. Usually, on schedule, like a tide. She was still awake at 3, and at 4 she took the candle down to the library and found the 4th notebook and turned to the last 20 pages. And there it was, in her own hand, dated the previous February. I am setting this down because I will need it later, and because I do not entirely believe it in daylight. I have worked out what frightens me, and it is not the curse. It is that I cannot prove my own feeling is mine. He is very good to me. He is good to me in ways that are specific and unrepeatable and could only come from years of paying attention, and a woman who is treated like that will love the man doing it, because that is simply how we are built. So which is it? Do I love Draco Malfoy, or have I been so thoroughly known that I have mistaken accuracy for affection? I have no answer. I have only this. I have tried for 3 weeks to want something else. I sat in the garden and made myself imagine a life somewhere else, with someone else, and I could construct it perfectly well, and it was a decent life, and I did not want it. Not because it lacked him, because it was not true. That is all I have. It is not proof. It will not satisfy me next year, and it does not entirely satisfy me now. Hermione closed the notebook. She sat in the dark for a long time. The confrontation, when it came over something absurd. It was the last week of August, and hot, and she came into the kitchen at 4 in the afternoon and found on the table a small paper packet of the particular ginger nuts sold by a bakery in a village 11 miles inland, which she had eaten twice in her life and mentioned once, in passing, 3 weeks earlier, in the middle of a sentence about something else. She stood and looked at the packet. "You went to Athelney," she said. "I had business at the land registry." He did not look up from the papers spread at the far end. "There is no land registry at Athelney. There's a church, a bakery, and a very poor public house." Then I misremembered. "You went 11 miles for biscuits," I mentioned once. "I went 11 miles for biscuits," you mentioned once. He turned a page. "It's not a felony." And something in her broke open. How am I supposed to do this? She heard her own voice go up and could not stop it. How am I meant to know anything when you do that? You put the shawl on my chair before I'm cold. You leave the book open at the page I wanted. You go 11 miles for ginger nuts and then pretend it was the land registry, so I don't have to thank you for it. What am I supposed to feel? He set down the pen. "Nothing," Draco said. "You're supposed to feel nothing. That's rather the point of doing it quietly." That is not an answer. That is a defense. It's both. They're often the same. He stood. "What would you have me do instead? Stop? Would you like me to serve you tea you don't like? Shall I put your book back on the shelf shut and let you find your own page? Would that make it easier to work out what's yours?" "Yes." She slammed her palm flat on the table, and the packet jumped. Yes, frankly, yes, it would. Because, at the moment, I am living inside a machine built by a man who knows exactly which levers move me, and every single day it moves me, and I cannot tell whether that is love or whether it is simply what happens when you are handled well enough for long enough. He went very still. "Handled," he said. "You know what I mean." "I know precisely what you mean, and I want you to hear yourself say it again." "Draco!" "Say it. I don't know if what I feel is mine." It came out of her at full volume, and the kitchen rang with it, and the gull on the ridge tile went up off the roof with a clatter. There. That's it. That is the whole of it. I have spent 9 weeks in this house falling in love with my own husband, and I cannot tell whether I am doing it or whether it is being done to me. And the reason I can't tell is that you are too good at this. You are too careful and too accurate, and you never once put a foot wrong. And no one is like that, Draco. No one, unless they are working. The silence afterwards was enormous. He stood at the end of the table with both hands flat on the wood, and she watched the knuckles go from pink to bloodless, and watched him breathe once, twice, deliberately, the way a man does when he has decided in advance that he will not say the thing he is about to say. He said it anyway. "Do you know what I do in the first week of June?" "What?" "Every year. On the 7th, the 8th, the 9th. Do you know how I spend them?" "No." "I stop." His voice was perfectly level, and something underneath it was shaking. "I stop being careful. For 3 days, I am exactly as unbearable as I have any right to be. I am short with you. I contradict you. I leave the room in the middle of your sentences. I let you see me drink at 11 in the morning. And you take it, because by June you love me. And love makes people forgiving in ways that are frankly alarming to watch." He straightened. "And then, on the 10th, you wake up and you have no idea why you would put up with a man like that for an hour. And it is the correct opinion, and I hold it too." "Why would you?" "Because I wanted to know the same thing you want to know." His eyes were terrible. "Whether it was the tea, whether if I stopped, if I gave you nothing, if I made myself as difficult to love as I actually am, you would still—" He stopped. He picked up the pen. He put it down again. "And," she said, "and you did." Very quietly. "Every year. You did anyway. So no, Hermione, it isn't the levers. I've tested it. I have run the only experiment available to me, and I have run it 5 times, and I have hated myself for every hour of it. And the result is always the same, and it has never once made me feel better." She had her hand over her mouth. "You made yourself cruel," she said, "to find out if I loved you. I made myself ordinary. There's a difference, though God knows it doesn't look like one from where you're standing." He gathered his papers with hands that were not steady and did not succeed in making a neat pile of them. "So, take the biscuits or throw them in the sea. But do not stand in my kitchen and call it a machine, because I have had 5 years to build one, and if I had built it, you would never have needed to ask." He went past her towards the door, and she caught his sleeve. Not his hand. His sleeve, 2 fingers of linen, and it stopped him as completely as a wall. He did not turn around. She could feel him through 2 fingers of linen, the whole rigid architecture of a man holding himself upright by force of will, his breath gone shallow, the muscle at his forearm hard as rope. The papers were still in his other hand, and he had not straightened them. "Let go," Draco said. "No. Hermione, I am asking you. I know you are, and I'm refusing, and you'll have to do something about it or stand here." Her heart was going so hard she could hear it in her ears. "That's the first honest thing that's happened between us since June, and I'm not letting go of it." He turned. He turned so slowly that she had time to think about what she was doing, and did not stop. And when he was facing her, he looked down at her hand on his sleeve, as though it were an object he could not classify. "You want to know what's yours?" he said. "Yes." "Then take your hand off me and go and find out somewhere I'm not standing." His voice was quiet and stripped of everything. "Because I promise you that whatever you decide with your fingers in my shirt will not survive the winter." She let go. He went out. She heard the door to the yard, and then nothing. And then, 20 minutes later, the flat, cracking report of a spell going into the old sycamore stump at the bottom of the garden. And then another and another at intervals for the better part of an hour. She did not go to the window. September turned the light. The mornings came in white off the sea and burned back by 10, and the hedges filled with sloes, and the espaliers arrived from the nursery in wet sacking, 12 of them, bare-rooted and unpromising as bundles of sticks. He planted them along the south wall over 4 days. She watched from the library window on the first day and came out on the second, and by the third she was holding the line while he set the posts, and neither of them said anything about the packet of ginger nuts which had gone from the table and reappeared in the tin where the biscuits were kept, unopened. "Commis want a warm wall," he said, driving in a stake. "They'll sulk anywhere else." "You said 4 years to fruit." "On a good root, 5 more likely in this soil." He straightened and pushed his hair off his forehead with the back of a wrist, leaving a streak of earth at the temple. "You'll have pears in the autumn of 31, if the wall holds and I don't kill them. I'll have pears." "That's what I said." "You said I'll have pears, not we." He bent to the next stake. "Slip of the tongue." "It wasn't." "No," he agreed, "it wasn't," and drove the stake in and did not offer anything further, and she stood holding the line with her hands going cold, and understood that she had just been shown the shape of a thought he had been carrying alone for some time. October was the worst of it, and the best, and she could not afterwards separate the two. They worked. That was the strange mercy of it. They worked side by side at the long table with the lamps lit at 4 in the afternoon, wading through the Bramhall correspondence, the Kirkwall transcripts, a mad and enormous file of continental sources that her own margin note had told her not to waste August on, and which she had wasted September on regardless, because she had needed to eliminate it herself. And in the working, there was a thing that no amount of tea and no packet of biscuits could have manufactured. He was quick. She had forgotten, or had never properly known, how quick. He came at a problem sideways, from the direction of consequence rather than cause, and 3 times in a fortnight he saw something in a document that she had read past, once a discrepancy in a date, once a phrase in a will that meant something specific in old estate law, and nothing at all otherwise, once, memorably, a repeated formula in a black inventory that turned out to be a bookbinder's mark, and not a rune at all, which cost them a week, and which he apologized for with a sincerity out of all proportion. "You've saved me 2 months, she said, on the night of the date discrepancy. "I've saved us 2 months. "That's what I said. "It isn't, but I'll allow it." He pushed the parchment across. "Look at the seal. It's her hand on the letter, and it's not her hand on the endorsement, and the endorsement is dated 11 days after she died. Someone finished it. Someone finished it." His eyes came up, which means the working wasn't abandoned, which means Bramhall's theoretical is worth rather less than we've been paying it. They sat with that. "Who?" Hermione said. "There are 2 people it could be." He turned his glass a quarter turn on the table and did not drink from it. One of them is dead. The other one is in can until the end of the month. Your mother. My mother. Draco. Not tonight. He said it without heat. I'll write to her. I have written to her 4 times over 4 years and had 4 extremely gracious replies about the weather. But this is different. This is a document, and she has never once had to look at a document. He drained the glass. Let me do it in my own way. She's the only family I have left, and I would like to keep her if it can be managed. And if it can't? He set the glass down. Then it can't, he said. They stayed up until 2. At some point, the fire went low, and neither of them mended it, and at some point she stopped being able to read the columns and put her head back against the settle. And at some point after that, she came out of a half-doze to find that a blanket had been put over her, and that he was on the floor by the hearth, with his back against the settle end, 3 feet away, reading with the last of the candle. She lay still and watched him through her lashes. The candlelight had got into his hair and turned it the colour of new rope. He read with his mouth slightly open, which he would have died rather than know. Every so often he made a small sound of disagreement at the page, and once, without looking up, without any change of expression at all, he reached back and adjusted the corner of the blanket where it had slipped off her shoulder, and returned his hand to the book and went on reading. She lay in the dark and felt something arrive in her chest that was not gratitude and was not sympathy, and had no interest whatever in whether it could be proved. She got up. She meant to go to bed. That was what she told herself as she stood, blanket falling, and she got as far as the middle of the room before her feet stopped, and she turned, and he was already looking at her. Because of course he was. He had heard her stand. He heard everything. Go to bed, he said. Don't tell me what to do. He put the book down and got to his feet, and the candle guttered with the movement, and the shadows came up the walls and swung and settled. It's late, that's all. Things happen at 2 in the morning that don't survive the daylight, and I've been on the wrong end of that particular arrangement more times than I care to itemize. Then say no to me. What? You've said you won't reach for me. Fine. That's your rule, and I've heard it recited enough times to sing it. She was walking towards him, and she was aware, distantly, of a roaring in her ears. So, I'm reaching, and if you want it to be nothing, then say no, out loud, and I will go to bed, and we will never speak of it again. She stopped in front of him, close enough that the candle put its light on the side of her face and left his in shadow. Close enough to feel the heat of him and to smell wood smoke and ink and the faint metallic ghost of the hex he had thrown at the sycamore stump 6 weeks ago, and which she was probably imagining. He had not stepped back. His hands were at his sides, and one of them was shaking very slightly, and he saw her see it and closed it. Hermione! Say no. You are asking me, he said, and his voice had gone rough and very low, to be the one with the discipline. Again, for the 5th time. Do you know what you're asking? Yes. I don't think you do. His eyes moved over her face, and there was nothing careful left in them at all. Because if I put my hands on you now, tonight, in October, then you will love me by Christmas. You always do, and it will be splendid, and I will get 5.5 good months, and on the 9th of June, I will look at you across that table, knowing exactly what's coming. And on the 10th, you will wake up and find you have been sharing a bed for 8 months with a man you cannot feel a thing for. And you will be kind about it. That's the worst of it. You're always so bloody kind about it. So the answer is no. The answer has to be no. That is not what I asked. Her voice cracked and she let it. I did not ask what the answer had to be. I asked you to say it. To me, out loud. Look at me and say no. And he did look at her. He looked at her for what felt like a very long time, and she watched the whole apparatus of his self-command fail piece by piece. The jaw, the shoulders, the careful neutrality of the mouth. And she saw him take a breath to say it, and she saw the word arrive and stall. He lifted his hand. He got as far as her face, not touching. The heel of his palm hovering perhaps an inch from her cheek, near enough that she could feel the warmth of it against her skin, like the heat off a stone that has been in the sun. And she stood absolutely still and did not close the distance, because it had to be his. It had to be. That was the entire architecture of the thing. No, Draco said. His hand did not move. Say it again, she whispered. No. And then his fingers closed on nothing, and he pulled the hand back and turned away from her towards the hearth, and gripped the mantle with both hands, and stood with his head down and his shoulders working. Go to bed, he said. Please, Hermione, please go to bed. She went as far as the door. You're wrong, you know, she said, from the dark of the passage. About what I'd feel in June. You've assumed for 5 years that the only thing you can give me is a good year. It hasn't once occurred to you that a woman might rather have 8 months of being loved badly than a lifetime of being handled correctly. It's occurred to me. Then, it's occurred to me every single day since the 2nd year. He did not turn round. And every time it does, I take out the arithmetic and I look at it and it comes out the same. You are not choosing between 8 months and a lifetime. You are choosing while under the influence of a curse that has arranged for you to meet me at my most sympathetic. And the woman who wakes up in June has no say in it whatsoever. Somebody has to hold that woman's proxy. His knuckles were white on the mantle. I have appointed myself. It's the only office I've ever wanted, and I intend to discharge it properly. And if she'd release you? She can't. She isn't here. That's the entire difficulty. He lifted his head at last and looked at her reflection in the black glass of the window, and his voice, when it came, was almost gentle. Go to bed, Granger. She went. At the turn of the stair she stopped, one hand on the gouged newel post, and stood in the dark for a long moment with her forehead against the cold wood, and made herself a promise she had no way of keeping, and every intention of keeping anyway. 3 weeks later, on the 9th of November, a letter came from Cannes in a hand she did not know, and Draco read it standing at the kitchen window and did not say a word, and then put it down on the table and walked out of the house without his coat. She read the letter before she went after him. She was not proud of it, and she did not hesitate. It was 4 lines in a slanting, beautiful, old-fashioned hand. I have something of hers. I have had it since the September you speak of, and I have not been able to bring myself to give it to you or to burn it. Come on the 15th. Bring your wife. I would rather do this once. It was signed with an initial. She found him at the bottom of the garden, standing among the bare espaliers with the wind coming off the sea and no coat. And she brought his coat, and he took it without a word and did not put it on. "She's had it 6 years," he said. "Yes, 6 years. Every Christmas, every one of these bloody Juniors." He was looking at the wall. "She sat at my table on the 11th of June 4 years ago and held my hand and told me I was bearing it well. Draco, don't defend her. I wasn't going to." Hermione put her hands in her pockets to keep from doing anything with them. "I was going to say that she's giving it to you now, and that a woman who was protecting herself would have burnt it in the first year." He was quiet for a while. The sea made its long, slow sound beyond the fields. "Yes," he said at last. "That had occurred to me. I'm not ready to be fair about it yet." "You don't have to be. It's the 9th. You have 6 days." They went to Cannes on the 15th. Narcissa Malfoy received them in a room full of white light, with the shutters half drawn against a sea so blue it looked like an insult. She had grown thin in a way that suited her and terrified her son. She kissed Hermione on both cheeks, which was new, and which Hermione understood was meant to be a statement and could not decide about. There was no preamble. The thing on the table was a wooden box the length of a forearm, banded in iron gone black, and she did not open it. She put her hand flat on the lid and left it there. "The knife is not in this," she said. "The knife was destroyed by the ministry in '99, and I watched them do it, and it made no difference because the working was never in the metal. This is her book." Her working notes. It was in the false bottom of a case in the east attic, and I found it in the September I had the floor mended, and I have carried it about with me from house to house for 6 years. "Why?" Draco said. "Because I read it." Narcissa's hand did not move from the lid. "Because I read it in one sitting on the floor of that attic, and I understood what it meant, and I understood that if I gave it to you, you would use it, and I could not." Her voice, which had been perfectly steady, went somewhere and came back. "You were 24. You had one thing in your life that had not been ruined, and I did not have the courage to hand you the instrument for ruining it. That is the whole of my defense, and it is a poor one, and I have known it was poor for 6 years, and I am giving it to you now because I have had a letter from my physician, and I find I would prefer not to die with it in the house." The room was very quiet. Draco did not move. "Mother." "No, not today. Today is not about my liver." She pushed the box 6 inches across the table towards Hermione, not towards her son. "It is your arm. You should be the one to open it." Hermione opened it. It took the rest of the day and most of the night to read, and it was, page for page, the ugliest document she had ever held. Bellatrix Black had been 19 when she began it, and 46 when she stopped, and the working had been refined over 27 years, with a patience that would have been magnificent in any other application. There were diagrams. There were failed attempts annotated. There were, in a passage Hermione had to put down and walk away from twice, notes on 4 earlier subjects, 3 of whom had died, 1 of whom had been a housemaid. And at the back, in a hand grown smaller and more cramped with age, there was the grammar of it. The working did not attach to a person. Bram Hall had been right about that and had not gone far enough. It attached to a bond, specifically to the magical structure raised by a marriage vow between the marked woman and a man of the blood. It fed on that structure. It could not exist without it, in the way a barnacle cannot exist without a hull. Hermione read the passage 4 times. Then she read it aloud in the White Room at 11 o'clock at night, with the shutters open and the sea going black outside. "It has no anchor of its own," she said. "It never did. That's why it lay dormant for 4 years. It wasn't waiting for a trigger. It was waiting for a structure to inhabit. It's parasitic on the bond." She looked up. Draco. If the bond ends, the working has nothing to hold. He had not said anything for 2 hours. "Say the rest of it," Narcissa said from the window. "If we dissolve the marriage," Hermione said, "it dies." The clock in the hall struck the quarter. "No," said Draco. "It's in the book. It's in her own hand. She says it 3 separate." "I heard you. I can read." He stood up. "No. Draco, this is the first... It is the first thing in 6 years that has actually worked. Yes, I am aware. I am not an idiot." His voice had gone up, and he brought it down with visible effort. "And what it says is that the cure for my wife is not being my wife. Do you understand what you are asking me to do? You are asking me to sign a paper that says the past 6 years were a mistake I have now corrected. I am asking you to save my life. It is not your life. It is your affection, and I have never once..." He stopped dead. "Finish it. I have never once asked you for it." Very quietly. "I have taken it when it was given, and I have gone without it when it wasn't, and I have never asked. So do not stand there and tell me the price of my not being ruinous to you is that I stop being your husband, because that is not a cure, Hermione. That is a verdict. It's a mechanism. It's a verdict dressed as a mechanism, and if you cannot see the difference, then you have not been paying attention." Narcissa turned from the window. "He is frightened," she said, "that if you are no longer bound to him, you will look at him without the vow to explain why you stayed, and you will not want what you see." She said it without cruelty and without softening. "It is the family disease, Miss Granger. We do not believe anyone remains except by contract. His father believed it. I believed it for 30 years, and I have watched my son spend 6 of them proving it to himself in the only way available. Mother, I would be obliged. I know you would." She crossed to him and put her hand against his face, and he flinched and let her. "You have been magnificent. You have also been a coward about precisely one thing, and it is this one. And I am going to say it now because I have run out of the luxury of waiting." He took her wrist and moved her hand away gently and set it down. "I want the room," he said. "Draco, Hermione, please, I want the room." She gave it to him. She stood on a terrace for half an hour with the sea moving in the dark and the box on the table behind her through the glass. And when she came back in, he was sitting exactly where he had been, and his mother was gone, and the book was closed. "There are conditions," he said. "Tell me. If we do this, we do it properly." He did not look up. "Not a technicality. Not a dissolution on paper with the 2 of us in the same house pretending. The working is not stupid. It has been refined over 27 years by a woman who understood magical structures better than anyone at the ministry, and if there is a way for it to keep its grip through a legal fiction, it will find it." He turned the box a fraction on the table. "So, it has to be real. Separate houses, no correspondence, no arrangements to be at the same places. Nothing that could be construed by any court or any curse as a continuing bond. For how long? Until after the 10th of June. His jaw was rigid. It has to survive an anniversary that no longer exists. If the day comes and goes and you still... He stopped. If the day comes and goes and nothing is taken, then it's dead. And if I still feel nothing, on the 11th? Then you will be free, Draco said, which was always the point, and you will not owe me an explanation, and I will not ask for one. That is the arrangement. He looked up at last, and his eyes were dry and terrible. You want the second condition? Yes. You do not tell me, between now and June, what you intend to do afterwards. His voice was flat. Not a hint, not a kindness. If you decide in March that you'll come back, you say nothing. If you decide in March that you won't, you say nothing. Because if you tell me either one, I will spend 3 months holding on to it. And it will be a bond, Hermione. It will be exactly the sort of thing that thing feeds on. And I have not survived 6 Junes in order to be sentimental in the last one. She sat down opposite him. And your condition for yourself? I don't have one. Yes, you do. You've been holding it since your mother left the room. He almost smiled. It did not reach anything. I want it recorded somewhere, he said. In front of you, tonight, that I am not doing this because I have stopped wanting to be married to you. I want that on the record because I know precisely how it will look in April, when you are in some rented flat in London with your own furniture and your own door key, and you will begin to construct a version of these 6 years in which I was relieved. He set both hands flat on the table. I will not be relieved. I will be in that house with 12 pear trees against a south wall, and I will be in it alone. And I want you to know that I knew that when I agreed. The bond was severed on the 11th of December, in a room at the ministry with a grey carpet and a window that did not open. It was not dramatic. That was the obscenity of it. A functionary read a form. They each put a hand on a plate of dull metal, and there was a sensation like a small door closing somewhere below the breastbone, and a light that had been amber went out, and the functionary said, "Thank you both," and asked if they required a certified copy. Draco said yes. Hermione said no. They walked out into Whitehall in the sleet and stood on the pavement, and there was a moment when it would have been the most natural thing in the world for him to put his hand on her back and steer her towards the corner. He put his hands in his pockets. "Your things are at the Bayswater flat," he said. "The lease is in your name. It's paid to the following December, and before you argue about it, it was paid out of the account that has your name on it, and has had since the 2nd year, so it isn't a gift, it's arithmetic." Draco. The Athelney Bakery does deliveries. I've written the address inside the lid of the tin, which is in the 3rd box. He was speaking very quickly now, the way a man does when he has 1 minute of use left in his voice. Bramhall will want a letter in the spring. Don't let her charge you. I've settled the account through to next year. And don't, Draco, don't let anyone tell you it was a mistake, he said. Not your friends, not your mother, not the prophet if they get hold of it. It was 6 years. It happened. Whatever you decide in June, it happened, and I would do all of it again. She could not speak. He turned up his collar and stepped back, one pace, then another, and the sleet came down between them, and the traffic went past. "Goodbye, Hermione," he said, and disapparated from the middle of the pavement without waiting to see her face. The flat in Bayswater had 4 rooms and a window that rattled in the wind. She spent the first week arranging books because it was the only activity that had ever reliably held her together, and at the end of the week she looked at what she had built and found that she had reproduced, shelf for shelf, the ordering system from the library at Wren Hollow. Arithmancy by decade, ward theory, the curse breaking at eye level. She sat down on the floor between the boxes and did not cry, quite, but came near enough to frighten herself. Christmas she spent at the Burrow, which was loud and warm and smelled of cloves and scorched brandy, and where nobody said his name once in 3 days. That was Molly's doing, and it was meant kindly, and by the second evening Hermione wanted to stand on the table and shout it. It was Ginny in the scullery, with her hands in the sink, who finally did. "You can talk about him, you know. Everyone's being so careful. Everyone's being cowardly. There's a difference." Ginny handed her a plate to dry. "Harry's convinced you'll cry, and Ron's convinced he'll say the wrong thing, which for once in his life is an accurate self-assessment. So, Malfoy. Malfoy, are you all right?" "No." It came out easily, which surprised her. "No, I'm not, but not in the way people think. Everyone assumes I'm grieving a marriage. I'm not. The marriage was the thing that was killing me." She set the plate down. "I'm grieving the fact that I don't know what I want, and there is no one on this earth who can tell me, and the one person who could talk me through it is the person I'm not allowed to write to." Ginny was quiet for a moment. "Can I say something you won't like?" "Presumably you will regardless. You've been describing this whole thing to me for 6 years as a problem to be solved. Every letter, every visit. It's always been the curse, the mechanism, the notes, the arithmetic." She pulled the plug and the water went down with a shudder. "And in 6 years, I have never once heard you say what he's like. Not what he does, what he's like." Hermione opened her mouth. "He hums when he's working with his hands," she said. "Badly. He doesn't know he's doing it. He's frightened of gulls. He reads terrible novels and hides them under his legal papers like a schoolboy with contraband." Her throat had closed. "He puts a blanket over me when I fall asleep in the library, and he doesn't say anything about it in the morning because he worked out years ago that I hate being caught having needed something." "Right," said Ginny. "That isn't an answer to anything." "It's the only answer there is, you enormous idiot," said Ginny, and put her arms around her and held on while Hermione shook. January was study. She went back to Bramhall in the cold, alone, and the old woman looked at her arm under the lamp for a long time, and then sat back with an expression Hermione could not read. "It's quieter," Bramhall said. "Quieter. Not gone. Nothing's gone until June, and I'll not lie to you about that. But it's got the look of a thing whose scaffolding's been taken down." She rolled Hermione's sleeve back into place herself with unexpected gentleness. "You'll want to know whether it'll take from you in June regardless." "Yes." "I don't know. Nobody knows. She never got to test it on a woman who left." Bramhall poured the tea nobody would drink. "Can I ask you something impertinent?" "You've earned it." Does he write? No, that was a condition. Neither of us writes. Said Bramhall, and stirred her tea, and said nothing else at all on the subject, which was somehow worse than an opinion. February was the month she stopped sleeping. It arrived without warning on a Tuesday in the middle of a perfectly ordinary evening. She was reading. She turned a page and found that her hand had stopped, and that she had been staring at the same paragraph for 11 minutes, and that what she had actually been doing was standing in a cold library at 2 in the morning, watching a man reach back without looking and adjust a blanket that had slipped off her shoulder. She put the book down. She went to the window and stood with her forehead against the glass and the London traffic hissing on the wet road below, and she made herself say it out loud in an empty flat. I miss him. Nothing collapsed. The building stood. The rain went on. I miss him, and there is no curse making me, and no vow requiring me, and no ledger in a library. And I am 31 years old, and standing in a rented flat in Bayswater, missing Draco Malfoy. And it is mine. She said it 3 more times, at intervals, over the next 4 hours, testing it the way one tests a floorboard. It held every time. And then the enormous, ridiculous, unbearable fact of the arrangement landed on her. She could not tell him. Not a letter, not a word, not a hint, until after the 10th of June, which was 4 months away, and he was in that house with the 12 pear trees, and he had been in it since December constructing, in the absence of any information whatsoever, the version of events he had predicted to her face in Cannes. She had never in her life wanted so badly to be allowed to do something as simple as write down a sentence. March. She nearly broke it. She got as far as the ink. She sat at the desk with a fresh sheet and wrote his name at the top and looked at it for 20 minutes. And then she thought about a man saying, I will spend 3 months holding on to it, and it will be a bond. And she put the pen down and burnt the sheet in the grate and sat and watched it curl. Then she took a second sheet and wrote at the top, in a hand that was almost steady, to myself on the 11th of June, and filled 4 pages and sealed it and put it in the drawer and did not read it again. April was work. She took a position she had turned down twice before in the Department of Mysteries on a team that dealt with structures rather than objects, a subject she now knew a great deal about, in the way that people who have been struck by lightning know a great deal about weather. It was good work. It filled the hours. Twice she was asked, in the delicate way of colleagues, whether she was quite settled, and twice she said yes, and twice she went home and ate standing up at the counter. She saw him once. It was the 14th of April in Diagon Alley in the rain. She had come out of Flourish and Blots with her hood up, and he was 30 yards off on the other side of the street, coming out of the bank with a case under his arm, and he stopped. They stood. The rain came down between them, and people went past on both pavements, and Hermione's hand came up out of her pocket about 2 inches, entirely without instruction, and stopped. He did not move. He did not raise a hand. His face did nothing at all, which she had learned to read years ago and could still read at 30 yards through weather. The total neutrality of a man holding himself together by refusing every single available gesture. Then he inclined his head. barely, a quarter of an inch, a courtesy between strangers. And he turned and walked up the street away from her without looking back, and she stood outside the bookshop with the rain running off her hood until a woman with a pram asked whether she was quite all right. She went home and was sick, and then sat on the bathroom floor and laughed until it turned into something else. May was long. June came in hot. On the 8th, she did not sleep. On the 9th, she took the day off, told no one, and walked from Bayswater to Hampstead and back because sitting still had become impossible. She ate nothing. She came home at 7 and found she was shaking and could not tell whether it was the walking or the hour. The vow had been spoken at 20 minutes past 4 in the afternoon, 6 years ago. That had always been the hour. It arrived on the 10th of June like a train that had never once been late. She had thought a great deal about how to spend it and had arrived in the end at nothing clever. No wards, no monitoring charms, no colleagues from the department in the next room with instruments. If it was going to take, it would take, and she had decided that she would rather it found her doing something she had chosen. So at 4 o'clock on the 10th of June, she sat down in the one good chair by the rattling window with the rain coming on, and she made a list, not of facts. She had never had trouble with facts. She wrote, "He hums when he works with his hands." She wrote, "He is frightened of gulls." She wrote, "He went 11 miles for ginger nuts and lied about the land registry." She wrote, "He ordered 12 pear trees in a June when he had 1 day left, knowing I would wake up and not know why he had bothered." She wrote, "He stood in a doorway at Malfoy Manor and refused to defend himself, and it is the single most honourable thing I have ever watched a person do." She wrote, "He made himself unbearable for 3 days a year for 5 years, to find out whether I would love him anyway, and hated himself for it, and never once told me while it would have done him any good." She wrote, "He let me go." At 12 minutes past 4, her hand began to shake so badly that the nib tore the paper, and she put the pen down and gripped the arms of the chair and sat with her eyes open. The rain thickened on the glass. A car went past below, tires hissing. At 16 minutes past, she thought about the cliff path in the low gold light and the marram grass going flat in silver waves, and about a hand hovering an inch from her cheek in a dark library with a candle guttering, close enough that she had felt the heat of it, and a man saying no in a voice that meant the entire opposite. At 18 minutes past, she was crying and did not know when she had started. At 20 minutes past 4 in the afternoon on the 10th of June, in a rented flat in Bayswater with the rain coming down the window and a torn sheet of paper on her knee, Hermione Granger sat absolutely still and waited to be robbed. The clock on the mantel ticked. Nothing happened. She waited. 21 minutes. 22. She held her breath until her chest hurt and let it out, and dragged in another, and reached, the way she had reached on that first morning 6 years ago, and every morning since, down into the place where the warmth was kept. It was all there, every particle of it, the whole enormous, unreasonable freight of it, 6 years and 4 months and 11 miles of ginger nuts, sitting in her chest exactly where she had left it, untouched, unbilled, unbroken. She made a sound she had never made before in her life. Then she was on her feet with the paper going off her lap and across the floor, and she was in the hall dragging her coat off the hook and getting one arm in it and abandoning the other. And the rain was coming down in sheets outside, and she did not care in the least, and she got as far as the door with her hand on the latch before it struck her, stopping her dead on the threshold with the door half open and the rain blowing in across her shoes, that she had absolutely no idea whether the man had waited. She stood in the doorway for the length of 10 heartbeats with the rain blowing in across the boards. 6 months of silence. No letters. No word from Cannes, or from Kirkwall, or from anyone else who might have carried news without meaning to. A 1/4-inch inclination of the head across a wet street in April, which she had read as a man holding himself together, and which could as easily have been a man who had put something down and walked on. He had told her to her face, in a white room above a blue sea, exactly what he expected her to build out of the silence. It had not once occurred to her that he would be building too. He might have sold the house. He might have gone abroad. He might have spent 6 months discovering that a life without a woman who forgot him every summer was a considerable improvement, and been entirely right about it. She pulled the door shut behind her and went out into the rain anyway, because the alternative was standing in that hall for the rest of her life. She apparated to the lane. It was a mile from the village to Wren Hollow, and she walked every yard of it. Her hair went in 3 minutes. Her coat, half on, went in 5. The hedges hissed and dripped, and the hawthorn had gone over and gone brown at the edges exactly as it had a year ago, and her shoes filled with water at the ford, and she did not slow down. The house came up out of the hedge low and long and grey. There was a light in it. She stopped in the lane with her hand on the gate and looked at that light for a long moment. And then she went round the side of the house instead of to the door, because something in her needed to see before she was seen. He was in the garden, along the south wall, in the rain, with no coat, the way he had stood in it a year ago, with his back to her while she drew the curtain. He had a bucket at his feet, and he was doing something at the base of the 6th tree, and the 12 espaliers had come on in a year. Real trees now, not sticks. The young growth tied out along the wires in a flat green fan, and he was working his way down the row in the wet with his sleeves shoved up his forearms. She came through the gate, and it made a noise. He straightened and turned, and the rain was in his eyes, and he put a wrist to them, and then he simply stood there. Neither of them said anything for what felt like an extraordinarily long time. "You didn't sell the house," she said. "No, I thought you might have. I considered it for about 4 days in January." His voice was hoarse, as though it had not been much used lately. "Then I worked out that if you came back and found strangers in it, I would have to explain myself to them, and I couldn't face the conversation. And if I didn't come back, then I'd have 12 pear trees and a wall." He had not moved from the 6th tree. "It's the 10th. "Yes." "What time is it?" 25 to 5. Something went across his face that he could not get hold of quickly enough, and he turned half away and put his hand flat against the brick of the wall, as though he needed the wall's opinion of the matter. "Then it's gone past," he said. "Yes." "Say it, Hermione. Please. Don't be kind about it. Don't ease me into it. Just... It's gone." Her voice broke on it. "It took nothing. I sat in a chair and waited for it, and it came and went, and it took nothing at all. It's dead, Draco." It's been dead since December, and it's only now that anyone could prove it. He put his other hand on the wall. He stood like that, with his head down and both palms against the brick, and the rain running off him. And she watched a man who had held himself in a particular shape for 6 years find out that he was allowed to stop and be entirely unable to work out how. She crossed the grass and stopped an arm's length from him. "Look at me. Give me a moment. You've had 6 years of moments. I'm aware." A laugh went out of him with nothing behind it. "You'll forgive me. I've spent 180 days constructing every possible version of this, and none of them involved you standing in my garden in the rain, and I find I've prepared for the wrong. Draco, look at me." He turned around. His face was wet, and it was not entirely the rain, and he had got thinner, and there was something in his eyes that she had never once seen in 6 years of Juness. No arrangement at all. Nothing held. A man standing in front of her with the whole of it showing. "I have 2 things to say," she said, "and you are going to let me say both of them before you speak, because I have been holding them since February, and if I don't get them out in the right order, I'll never manage it. All right?" In February, I stood at a window in Bayswater at 1 in the morning and said out loud that I missed you. Her chin was shaking, and she let it. There was no curse on me. There was no vow. You were not in the room being good at me. You were not putting a blanket over my shoulders or lying about the land registry. There was nothing to explain it and no one to please. And I said it anyway. And then I said it 3 more times because I did not believe it, and it was true every time. She dragged a breath in. That was 4 months ago. I have wanted to write it down every single day since, and I did not, because you asked me not to, and it was the hardest thing I have ever done, and I have been tortured by Bellatrix Lestrange. He made a sound. "The second thing," she said. "You told me in Cannes that I would build a version of those 6 years in which you were relieved. I want you to know what I built instead. I built the list." She put her hand in her sodden pocket and took out nothing, because the paper was on a floor in Bayswater with a tear where the nib had gone through. And she made an empty gesture with her wet fingers and gave up. The humming, the gulls, the novels under the legal pads, 11 miles for biscuits, 12 trees ordered on a day when you had 1 left, and you standing in that doorway at the manor refusing to give me a single reason to think better of you, when any other man alive would have. "Hermione, I'm not finished. You let me go." Her voice went up and cracked straight across. "You had 6 years of being the only thing holding it together, and the one solution required you to hand me my freedom and stand in an empty house and not know for half a year whether I would ever walk back through that gate. And you did it, without one condition that favored you. You paid a lease in my name and told me it was arithmetic, and you disapparated off a pavement in the sleet without waiting to see my face because you thought looking would be taking something." He was not making any effort to hide his face now. "That is why," she said. "That is the whole answer to the question I asked you in a kitchen in August, and I have had 6 months alone with it, and I am certain. It was never the tea, Draco. It was never the levers or the handling or any of it. It was that you are, underneath all that unbearable carefulness, the most fundamentally decent man I have ever known. And you have spent 6 years being ashamed of a boy who stood against a wall. And I would like you to stop, because I have met the man he turned into, and I have chosen him twice. Twice, he said. Once when I didn't know what it would cost. She stepped forward. And once now, knowing exactly, with nothing owing, nothing owed, no vow, no arrangement, no ledger. Nobody made me come. Nobody will make me stay. She was close enough now to see the rain on his lashes. So, that's it. That's everything I have. I'm here, and I'm not bound to you, and I want you, and you may do what you like with that. He did not move. Say something, she said. I can't. Draco, I have a rule, he said, and his voice had gone to pieces. And I have kept it for 6 years, and it is the only thing I have ever been able to hold on to, and I cannot, for the life of me, remember whether it still applies. She understood then precisely what she was looking at. A man who had trained himself so completely never to reach that the training had outlasted the reason for it, standing an arm's length from the only thing he had ever wanted, waiting for a permission that no longer existed anywhere but in his own hands. It doesn't, she said. It never has to again. I'm releasing you from it. Do you hear me? There is no woman waking up in June. There is no proxy for you to hold. There is nobody in this garden but me, and I am asking you. His hand came up. It got as far as it had got in October, in a dark library with the candle guttering, the heel of his palm an inch from her cheek, near enough that she felt the warmth of him against her wet skin. And she stood absolutely still and did not close the distance, because it had to be his, because it had always had to be his, because a woman who had been loved carefully for 6 years by a man who would not take one single thing without being given it was not going to rob him of the one gesture he had never once permitted himself. Hermione, he said, I know. And then his hand came down against her face, and his fingers went back into her wet hair, and he kissed her. It was not gentle. That was the thing she had not expected, and would think about for years afterwards. That 6 years of unfailing restraint, when it finally broke, did not come apart softly. His other arm went round her and pulled her in against him hard enough to drive the breath out of her, and she got a fistful of his sodden shirt and hauled, and there was rain on both their mouths and the taste of salt that was not rain, and he made a low sound against her lips that had 6 years in it. She kissed him back until her ribs hurt. At some point, her feet came off the ground for a moment. At some point, his hand found the back of her neck and stayed there, thumb dragging along her jaw, holding her as though she might be recalled. At some point, she realized he was shaking entirely from the shoulders down, and that she was too, and that neither of them could have said for how long. He broke away first, barely, an inch, his forehead down against hers, both of them breathing like people who had run somewhere. 6 years, he said. I know. 6 years, and I have never once. I know, Draco. You'll have to let me do that again fairly soon, he said, because I have got the hang of it, and I don't propose to lose it. And she laughed against his mouth, wet and undignified, and he kissed her through the laughing, and the rain came down on both of them, and neither of them made the smallest move towards the house. They stood in the garden for a long time. Later, when they had got inside and dripped through the hall, and he had lit the fire in the library with hands that still would not behave, she sat wrapped in a blanket on the settle with her feet in his lap, and made him tell her about the 6 months. All of it. The 4 days in January when he had nearly sold the house. The letter to Bramhall in March that he had written and burnt. The 14th of April in Diagon Alley when he had walked up the street away from her and got as far as the corner and been sick in a doorway behind the apothecary. "You bowed," she said. I inclined my head. "There's a difference. You looked like a man greeting an acquaintance." "I looked," he said, "like a man with about 4 seconds of composure left, who had calculated that the corner was 5 seconds away, and I want it on record that I did not make it." Later still, she asked about the trees. "They took," he said, "all 12. There'll be nothing for another 3 years, but they've set their frame." Autumn of 31. "You remembered." "I remember everything," Hermione said. "That was always the problem." They were married again in September, in the garden, with the espaliers along the south wall behind them, and 11 people on kitchen chairs in the grass, and no cathedral, and no hawthorn, and no ceremony worth reporting in any newspaper. Narcissa came, thinner still, and sat in the front, and wept without apologizing for it. Ginny read something short. Bramhall, who had not been invited to anything in 40 years, sent a clock. There was no vow of the traditional kind. They had discussed it for a week and settled it in an afternoon. Nothing that bound, nothing that obliged, nothing that any working built by any black could ever again get a handhold in. What they said instead, they had written themselves, and it was 4 lines long, and the whole of Draco's half was this: "I have loved you as a duty for 6 years, and I was good at it, and I do not want the office. I would like to love you as a choice instead. I will make it again tomorrow. I will go on making it every morning for as long as I am given mornings, and on the day I stop being able to choose it, you will know, because I will tell you." He got through it without his voice failing until the last 4 words, and then failed entirely, and Hermione put her hand flat against his chest in front of 11 people and held it there until he could go on. The following June, on the 10th, she woke before he did. The light was grey and early. Rain had come in the night and was letting go of the eaves in fat, unhurried drops, and the crack in the plaster ran from the cornice to the light fixture exactly as it always had, and the bed beside her was warm. He was asleep on his front, with one arm flung across the space between them, his hair in his eyes, his mouth slightly open, looking about 19. Hermione lay still for a moment and reached down, out of an old habit that would take years to lose, into the place where the warmth was kept. It was all there, every particle of it, and a year's worth more, and it was hers, and no one had ever had any claim on it but herself. She rolled towards him across the sheet and put her hand on the back of his neck, and he came up out of sleep the way he always did, instantly, braced, and then found her hand there and understood and let out a breath and turned his face into the pillow to hide what it was doing. "Good morning," she said. "It's the 10th. "I know what day it is." "Say it anyway," Draco said into the pillow. "Just this once, then I'll never ask again." She put her mouth against his shoulder. "I love you," said Hermione. "I loved you yesterday, I love you this morning, and I intend to go on doing it entirely of my own accord. And if you want to hear it tomorrow, you will simply have to be here." He turned over and pulled her down against him, and outside the rain went on over the 12 pear trees along the south wall, 3 years from fruiting, doing perfectly well.
Thank you for staying with this story until the end. I want to tell you what I was thinking while I wrote it. There is one small moment I kept coming back to. It is the ledger. Draco writes down his household accounts, call, the glazer, and then between those lines he writes other things. 19th of May, laughed at breakfast. 9th of June, one day. And on that same day, with one day left, he orders 12 pear trees, trees that need 4 years to give fruits. He knows she will wake up and not know why he bothered. That is the whole story for me. Right there, while I was writing, I kept asking myself one question. What is love really? It is feeling. Feeling comes and goes. Hermione loses hers every single year. Or is love something else? Something you do on a grey morning when nobody is watching and nobody will thank you. I think it is the second one. But here is the hard part. Draco loved her as a duty. He was very good at it. And it almost destroyed them both. Because love that is owed is not the same as love is that is chosen. She could not feel the difference, and neither could he. So he had to let her go. That was the only cure, not a spell, not a counter curse, just a man opening his hand and standing alone in an empty house for 6 months, not knowing if she would come back. That is the moral, I think. Real love is not a cage with a door left open. Real love lets you walk out, and it waits without demanding anything to see if you will walk back in. She walked back in through the rain. Thank you for listening. Plant your pear trees, even if the fruit is years away.